So Hannes isn't here. It's very strange. Did you ask us here now?
Not yet. All right, time to start. So, welcome to UTA. It's London, and let's see how far we can take this. So, note the note well. You know what it says, and if you're here, and note the fact that there have been IPR disclosures related to at least one of our drafts that we're working on. So this means that we have to be extra careful about this. So think about the note well. So this is what we're going to do today. We don't have a lot of time, but we're going to basically try to cover our document status. We're going to cover spend some face-to-face time on the outstanding MTA STS issues, try to resolve those. We believe those to be actually quite simple. And then we're going to get an update on the required TLS draft. And then there's open mic time. Now, proceeding, so this working group has produced quite a lot of output. Our core documents from early on are RFCs. Some of them have even got errata. I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing, but anyway. Our current work is getting done. All of the work except one, the two of the core documents that we're working on right now are scheduled for inclusion on the next near-term ISG telechats. Right, near-term ISG telechats, not the next telechat. And then we have the SMTP required TLS option to work on. So we don't have a lot of work left. There has been a couple of what's called the related drafts that turn up in data tracker. We haven't talked to Hannes yet, but Hannes has created this draft called Draft Chauffeurage UTA TLS 1.3 profile that he called it UTA. I think he means something by that, but we haven't talked to him yet, and he hasn't made any contact with the chairs of the working group. We'll see. And if he turns up before we're done today during open mic, maybe we can ask him.
Okay. Just a quick comment about the two documents, the MTA, STS, and report. So report is on ISG agenda for April 19th. So at the moment we have, ISG has too many documents on the next two telechats. So I put the STS one on the beginning of May. But anyway, I'll try to get it on the same April 19th one, but I apologized. I promised April 19th, but I hope that's okay. All right. Fine.
All right. Thanks, Alexei. All right. So we're going to spend a bit of time going back to our agenda, see if we can get some of the MTA STS issues resolved. Now we actually created a separate slide deck for that. And Alexei, we sort of dragooned you into talking to this because it's mainly area director review. And then there's a set of issues raised during sector review that we didn't actually put on the draft, but feel free to talk to those two.
Yeah, I think the IAN issue from sector review is the main question. Right, so yes, the major issue, by major issue, I mean, it's not necessarily difficult to fix, it's just, I think it needs to be fixed. One question is about ignoring all parameters to content type, and I suggest you don't ignore the char set parameter, because it affects how text, if somebody puts text file on the web server with wrong character set, which is not based on ASCII subset, then I think it seems as potentially problematic. So in this case, I'm sort of thinking of malicious or ignorant use of somebody if this is a file editable on a web server, then somebody can use a very obscure encoding. For example, in one of the Asian character sets, which is not UTF-8, and then that just becomes a bit problematic. Or even if you just use Unicode 16 or 32-bit based encoding, it's not going to parse correctly. Or UTF-8, yeah, Yes. So I think ignoring everything else is fine.
Please step up to the mic so the streaming people, we have actually quite a lot of remote.
So to repeat the question, you're fine.
And who are you?
I'm Daniel Margolis. Sorry. Thank you. You're fine with requiring UTF-8 or US ASCII. You're just saying instead of sort of require, like I think we say that it has to be UTF-8 or US, it has to be US ASCII. And we don't check the char set. You're saying we should actually have a char set that says that and check it. And I think that's reasonable because otherwise you might have strange errors that you didn't sort of track down easily.
So I think UTF-8 is a better approach because policy includes URLs. URLs can be internationalized and you can express them.
So we say that they have to be Unicoded, like the A-type.
Unicode.
So for practical purposes, at the moment, there is nothing in the policy document which is not ASCII. But because it allows for extensibility, we want to just be specific about this, saying, if in the future it might be UTF-8 or something, yeah.
Right. I mean, this seems, as Alexei says, it's important to do, but it seems not controversial. So the authors and the working group are fine doing this.
Channeling Ned Fried from the Jabber room says, require UTF-8 or ASCII done, ignoring labels is a bad idea.
This seems like consensus at this point in the working group, so let's move on. That's your second issue, Alexei.
Right. So this issue is just a sort of minor. Well, I think it's a very easy fix, but the reason why we went with colon separated key value pairs because you can reuse parser for email header fields. So you can just stick this into your existing parser and use it in a mail server. So if you allow for trailing white space, then basically it interacts with message line folding facility, which use spaces on the continuation lines. Right, space CRLF is going. So it will, if you feed it into a parser, then the second line become part of the first line, and then it's going to be wrong syntax. So I suggest just prohibit threading white space. And then you can just use this, there are no continuations in this format, but you will never be tricked into using one by allowing threading white space.
Channeling Victor Dukovny, leading, not trailing.
Sorry, to repeat, trailing white spaces are fine. I don't care. Leading white spaces are problematic.
Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of people disagreeing. I think this 2 is an easy fix.
Yeah, and I already suggested the fix. So
yeah,
this is
exactly.
just one line ABNF fix. So.
Channeling Victor Dukovny. Or no, sorry, Ned Fried, sorry. Is there a reason why they were allowed?
Daniel is trying to stand up.
So, yeah, I would say the reason was that we I think I wrote some code and I wrote some grammar that I thought matched the code. So no reason at all, stupidity.
All right, so let's not dwell on this, right?
Yeah, Jeff Hodges, AKA brain fade.
Yeah. Let's not dwell on it. Fix, move on, all right? So you got a bunch of minor issues. Do you want to talk to each of them, or do you just want to? They're mostly editorial, right?
Missing needs, updated keywords. Yeah, just carry on.
Tell me when to stop.
I can come back. Here, just an example. It shows 2MX records, but it's shown then in quotes as if it's a valid part of the policy document, but it actually requires CRLF in between them. So I suggest, to point out that there is a CRLF between them, or in case, people will try to cross-check the example against, the syntax, they might just get confused here. That's the point.
Yep.
Next one. Typically, if I want to be pedantic, you want to, might want to tighten the ABNF for this, but I don't care as long. If you want trailing, if you want leading zeros here, it's fine, but it's better if you say so. If you don't, you can tighten the ABNF. Carry on. For the policy document, I wasn't sure why certain characters were prohibited. It looks like it's exactly the same syntax as in the DNS record. But I'm just asking, is there a reason why it has to be the same?
So I thought the reason that Daniel Margolis again, I thought the reason that we were disallowing, it's just space maybe doesn't matter as much. I thought the reason we were disallowing equal sign is because that's significant between the key value pairs. So it makes it easier to just do a split on, you don't have to escape them or anything like that. Admittedly, you could say the first equal sign is the average.
Yes, and the other thing, you're disallowing space here. So if somebody adds a field, which is just a free line comment with spaces, this is actually disallowed by your grammar. I think that would be annoying for people because effectively you add a field and you make the whole policy document invalid. I don't know. That's sort of why I thought, I suggest you relax this, but.
This is going to go back a couple of issues.
Okay, sorry. So to the white space, Daniel Margolis again. I think the white space is absolutely fine because it sort of doesn't make parsing any more difficult. I don't have a strong feeling about equals, and I don't really know why we hit semicolon there. I don't think maybe because we reuse the grammar. Equals seems like it requires that you sort of be a little more careful in the parser to do sort of split up the first equals and then treat the trailing string as the value, but it's not exactly.
Actually, equals is not relevant for the policy document because you don't use it as a separate at all. Colon does, yeah, and semicolon as well is not actually relevant here.
So we're done with minor issues 8? Yeah. Okay. Jeff Hodges channeling Victor D. Back to minor issue 6. Victor says that he would list 2 quoted strings in that one.
That is a perfectly fine solution to this, yes. And say, 2 quoted strings and insert the word and in between or something like that. That's fine. Right. Just a clarity question, basically, to make sure that it's, either you're clear that it's just 2 pieces from the document or it's a, fully complete piece, of a document. So, yeah, either way.
Right. As long as everybody's fine with it. Yeah. All right. This one.
Yes, so this is basically your mention. Yeah, actually, this is probably slightly less minor than. intended it to be. Because RFC 5280 is already a PICX document, is a requirement. It describes how you validate chains, how you check for certificate expiry, and key usage and other things. The text sounds like you describe everything that needs to be checked, but it might be taken as a contradiction with how you would do it otherwise.
Daniel Margolis here. So I think we're fine with referencing the RFC 5280 and just sort of eliminating most of this text. But I think we weren't sure what to do about key usage restrictions. So I would sort of say we want to mirror sort of HTTPS is okay, not have any sort of new key usage or anything like that. But feedback?
Well, I don't actually know the exact answer to this question, but you can have certificates for SMIME, or you can have certificates for websites, and you might not, one might not be usable for other purpose. So depending whether the client, no, I'm not suggesting new usage. I suggest that maybe you should verify the usage.
Jim Fenton, do we allow certificates to be verified by Dean rather than by chain? I suggest you pass him in.
Yeah, well. All right, Victor, you're up.
I just want to ask Daniel, when he's talking about use, whether you use a certificate or you use an intermediate certificates as well, because there's a whole bunch of practice that's not described in 5280, but is common around EKUs further up the chain. And I don't know which EKUs he was asking about.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit, Victor.
Sorry about that. Maybe I should lower the volume on my end. So that was clear. I was asking about EKUs higher up the chain or only in the leaf certificate. Which EKUs did Daniel want to ask about?
Yeah, and I meant both.
Because I'm maintaining the validator in OpenSSL these days, and so I can speak to at least what that does.
Sorry, yeah, Daniel. So I think we want to do, I mean, the intent of the design was to do as close to what you would do when validating any other HTTPS resource if you're sort of a stream browser. So I think that's sort of the guiding principle. I have to be honest, I actually don't know what browsers do about intermediate certificate key usage. I assume they're restricted on it, but.
Okay. So EKUs are generally honored. So if your certificate is not valid for TLS as a server, then it will not validate if that's what the application tells the verification library that we're verifying a TLS server. It will fail if it's an SMIME server, generally.
Yeah. All right, Martin at the mic.
Martin Thompson. I think there may be a simplification you can make here. You can simply say that it must be valid for that host. End sentence. Because we're talking about HTTPS, and there are certain expectations of HTTPS. You could go to the trouble of referencing 6125 and 2818 and all of those things, but frankly, what you're going to get is people's HTTPS stacks. And that's the intent. You're not, all this worry about EKUs and whether or not you've got I can never pronounce that one properly, chasing, OCSP, stapling, blah, 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 CT, it's just a mess, right? So just say HTTPS and you'll get all of the baggage that comes along with that.
Actually, and this is not a browser talking, this is automated client, so that, well, yeah. Well, I think the text should be clear about, whether it was an exhaustive list of things you need to check, and I suspect it isn't. So reward it saying, maybe a bit more hand wavy, but more specific about what the expectations are.
I was being hand wavy. Sorry. I need to be clear about this point. I was being hand wavy. All of those things are policy decisions that the client makes. So you could choose to do any one of these things or all of these things or whatever subset of these things you deem appropriate. But right now, all of our documents are very, very careful to sort of fudge their way through this thing. And if you want to try to fudge your way through it here as well, you're likely to step on something or in something.
I think we're sort of venturing into this might not be quite interoperable, but I think a lot of people are doing the same things. Territory, yes. I know, and maybe we need a document that sort of be more specific about this, but
Hi, Jeff Hodges, are you referring to 2818? Which one? Oh, that's only about matching common name and stuff. It doesn't talk about all that other stuff. So he already, in the draft, he already references 6125 in 7 or 9 places. I just grepped it. And RFC, yeah.
Hey,
So
everybody
RFC,
needs to use the mic.
2818 is kind of some technical debt we haven't addressed. Yeah, we probably need to write something about what you were just postulating might exist and I would claim doesn't really.
Yeah, I will concede that none of this is written down. And that's kind of important, and that's kind of a deficit, and I don't want to put someone in that pit, because that's I mean, do you remember how long it took to get 6125 out? And that's just like this tiny little slice. It was years, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but that slice is one could claim done. But 2818 is actually a lot smaller, but whatever, yes, it's technical debt that we should probably address, and this spec is begging that question.
But we shouldn't address it in the spec if possible. So I think like our sort of issue, and clearly we sort of get it wrong when you try and specify actual behavior instead of referencing RFCs, but our intent was to reference existing RFCs when possible, and I think they're sort of, at least for me, sort of startlingly confusing anyway. So the sort of ideal feedback is which we're not referencing that we should be, where we're too specific and should not be.
right.
So Martin's proposal on the table is to replace all of this with a one-liner basically saying this should be a valid TCP, a valid HTTPS connection.
Which is not specified anywhere, right?
Yeah, understood, but it will lead to interoperability, most likely.
Okay, I think we're roughly agreeing. We're slightly backshading on specific text. Another way of addressing this text is saying, instead of making sure that it's not a full list of things you need to check, say, for example, and saying the intent is check that it's a valid HTTPS, yes.
This may sound like I'm creating a normative reference dependency here, but it's sounding like we're identifying, I haven't reread our charter, but it sounds like we're identifying an item that has to do with using TLS in applications. Something that may be another work item for this working group.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I was just about to say exactly what Jim said.
Anybody feel free to write up an individual submission for the working group and we'll consider it.
But I was also going to add to the point that I made before, it took Jeff and PSA so long to get 6125 out the door, which is this tiny little thing that due warning to everyone. Yeah, at 2818 biz, wouldn't that go down well? It's been discussed, yeah. It's a massive amount of work, so just make sure there's full disclosure here.
Yeah, Tim Halbeek. I think the for example approach is actually a great idea, especially if you use the name as the example of one of the things you should validate, because that's what people always forget to validate every time they're doing this stuff.
Hi, Jeff Hodges. It may be sufficient in this spec to plug in the suggestion that Alexei provides here, punt to 5280, and this already address it. It already more or less properly references 6125 in appropriate places.
Moving on.
Yeah, but yes, Jeff has something?
Victor, I'm channeling Victor again. Victor says, I don't expect any interesting deviations from normal HTTPS practice. So a brief, do it like other HTTPS clients do is probably okay. +1 for Martin.
Yeah, all right. So Daniel, do you guys feel comfortable crafting text based on this? Yeah, ish.
Well, we can just exchange it
Yeah.
offline.
All right, let's work it out on the list, but I think we have consensus on where we're going here.
Okay.
All right.
Actually, this is something that Chris brought up in his review, the use of SNI and requirements on its use. This is not a very well-formed concern. I just feel that certain implementations will suffer with trying to satisfy these requirements, especially on the I think server side I'm less concerned about. I'm more concerned about requiring on the client side.
Why? Daniel, the server doesn't have to implement it because you could have a server that serves a policy that only is used ever for one domain, right? But the client doesn't know if the server needs it or not. So if we're going to allow servers to ever use SNI, we have to require the client to send it, right? I mean, that was why we phrased it that way.
Yeah, I think the way I put it is I was interested in hearing from client implementers on the state of SNI implementation in their SSL stacks, because it's not clear to me how widely implemented it is in SSL stacks.
Okay.
So Martin Thompson, there are TLS stacks out there that don't support SNI. Anyone using one of those TLS stacks is owned already, basically. This is Android 2.2. What are we up to now? 17 or something? Yeah, it's crazy. But that's kind of the era in which we're talking about. Even Windows XP supports SNI. So I don't think this is a problem. This is very widely deployed. There's actually, if people are interested, there's slides in the MapRG research group on how much they see of this. It's still not universally deployed, but if someone's writing new code to do this, you're using a stack that's got SNI. Anyway, any rational person does.
So IB Victor, requiring SNI on the client works and is necessary. Yes. Those stacks are not used by MTAs.
Right. Yeah, it's probably uncommon for Android 2 devices to be running MTAs.
But now there was another piece of language in there which was stating the server must implement SNI, and I kind of like a clarification on that of that it's okay for the server to implement the extension and ignore it, because if the server doesn't need to use it.
Yeah, Daniel Margolis, that wasn't our intent to require the server to use it. I mean, as I said before, it may not be necessary.
So maybe it sounds like the right clarification here is to say that the clients must support and implement SNI, and be silent on whether the server does or not.
You said implement. I think we're talking about use.
Exactly, use. Sorry, absolutely.
So maybe let Victor speak to this and then. Oh,
You're on, Victor. I think, or you went away.
You went away. There's one other point that I wanted to make. Do we connect to servers using IP addresses at all, ever? Never? Okay, okay, good.
All right,
That would be a problem for SNI.
all right, Victor, you're up.
Yes, two things. First of all, in the Dane spec, the SSNI issue is covered in a bit more detail, and it explains that servers are free to not implement SNI and completely ignore it. If they do implement SNI, they should certainly choose the right certificate if they can, but what they must not do is abort the connection if they don't have a matching identity for the SNI. Clients often support multiple identities but can only send one, and so the server should not decide that just because it doesn't have a matching name, we need to hang up. It should return some default certificate and leave it up to the client to figure out if that's acceptable. And this is important for SMTP because multiple identities may be supported, and we don't know whether the client is an STS client or a Dane client or whatever, or is even opportunistic but doing SNI anyway, but doesn't actually care what's in the certificate. So servers should not get all picky about SNI. They should do their best but continue under all circumstances. Now, as for IP addresses, in fact, there are cases when SMTP uses IP addresses only when there are manually specified gateways for destination. So if you have an administrative override saying send mail to place X via smart host given by IP, that can happen. And in that case, at least Dane just says, if I remember correctly, that it's not applicable. Sorry, there's no Dane for IP addresses. And you can say the same thing about STS, that if you specify a gateway by IP, then all of this stuff is out of scope. You can do any kind of pinning or whatever certificate checks you want by local policy, but both STS and Dane can't really deal with IP addresses. And that's it from me for the moment.
So Martin Thompson, you can have an IP address certificate. So those are valid. But yeah, if everything's manually configured at this point, you're fine. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Is that the last issue from this set?
I just want to make sure we agree on what the consensus here is.
I feel the consensus is no change. The current text is possibly adequate. Is it?
So I actually heard Victor's make a suggestion to rip off text from the SMTP specification.
It doesn't talk about SNI. It's very old spec. SMTP start TLS.
Oh, yeah. That's
So the consensus that I've noted in the notes, which could be wrong and tell me to change it, is that we've agreed that clients must implement and use, and we don't care about the servers. Whether that's a textual change or not, that's what should end up. And so if there needs text change, then make the change, and if there's not, then don't.
all right. Are people okay with that?
Yeah, just authors to review for consistency.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all right.
fine.
Modulo. All right. Next, number 12. Yeah. Chris suggested security considerations.
Yeah, this is just, noting noting that this increases the attack surface of an MTA. And so, that needs to be mitigated, and this discusses that. And I don't think, hopefully this is not controversial. It's just, add the paragraph and we're done, I think.
All right.
Martin Thompson, from this threat can also be partially mitigated by isolating. I cut that. The key point here is that you've got a greater exposure, and I think that's all you really need to say. I don't mind a little bit of extra, you might like to do the following, but there are many, many, many things you might do to avoid these style of attacks.
Do you suggest more or less text?
Less text.
All right.
Quite a lot, I would say.
So you're suggesting drop the last two sentences.
The last two, yes. Both of them starting with this threat. No, it's two. There's two starting with this threat. So this threat can be partially mitigated.
Suggestions on how to mitigate.
Yeah.
So you're suggesting, do not suggest how to mitigate.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone with another point of view here? Otherwise,
I mean, my experience is it's good to suggest ways to mitigate. They don't have to be the only ways. Let people live with
I mean, I'm sure this will sort of, if the security directors are.
Actually, all three of the mitigations that have been discussed, we're going to do, so, including not implement in C, where MTA is in C.
Right. I'm hearing like some support for keeping the text as is, and some support for not caring, and
I think I prefer the text, but I'm sort of more ambivalent about it, so I don't mind either way.
I mean, remember, this is going to go through sector review too, and they're going to nitpick at security considerations. So
I have a,
we'll have another chance to revisit.
I have a slight preference for keeping the suggested mitigations. That's
All right.
But it's not a showstopper for me either way.
And Victor?
Yes, I just wanted to briefly back to SNI. I really think it's important that not only do we not care about the server, but actually we do want the server to be liberal and continue even if it can't find a specific certificate for the requested SNI. Otherwise you get into interoperability problems with clients that are indicating SNI for reasons other than STS and may be, or as I said, opportunistic, ordained, or whatever. You simply don't know how the client will behave in response to a default certificate, and you should leave that decision to the client, not abort the connection. I think that's
So Victor, it sounded like you had text. Could you like drop that text to the authors as a suggestion?
Sure, it's in RFC 7672.
Yeah, you sort of just cut and paste or give them the reference or something, right?
Okay, there's a whole section on it. Yeah, sure.
Is that okay with everybody? All right, I'm seeing nods and sort of, yeah. All right, good.
Okay.
All right. And I hear that the consensus on issue number 12 is that we keep the text. I think there were some people who expressed support for doing that. And, again, we're going to revisit this during sector review. So, all right, number 13. This is the NSEC. I think this was from Chris too, yeah? All right, we ignore that. And that's the last one. So, that concludes our walkthrough.
Sector review,
Sector review.
they are nothing. We need to talk about.
Yeah, let's, you mentioned the resolution.
So, Philip Hollenbaker said that we must register the underscore SMTP report or whatever it is in the IANA registry. And, well, he was suggesting that we should do the work to actually define the registry if it's not established. As it turned out, there is a registry in work, we should just use it. So my suggestion is whichever documents, this one or the one creating the registry, gets published first, doesn't include the text, if it makes sense.
Yeah, so to explain this, that this is a registry being created in DNSOP, and it's basically, the kitchen sink stuff of registry of all the underscore bits that they've found in various documents. They've just collected them up and created an IANA registry for it. It's sort of household cleaning. I guess your suggestion, Alexi, is that we sort of do a race condition on publication of that document, and if sort of they make it to RFC status and establish that registry before we do, then we can add a note to the RFC editor saying we need a registration in that.
Right. So,
Or
yeah,
or if we get there first, we just we don't have to do anything because we tell them they have to pick up another code point from our document, and we become legacy, another bit of legacy for them.
Correct. In either way, I will suggest specific text to add.
Yeah, what I think you're talking about here is to create an IANA registration entry for the registry which doesn't yet exist. And an RFC editor's note saying, use this if you can, or, if the registry doesn't exist,
We'll handle it.
we'll handle it in another way, right?
The,
The DNS op thing? It's called,
I can leave something.
yeah.
It's in progress, but I think it's getting there.
Just a clarification, Phil reviewed TLS RPT draft, but the issue equally applied to both draft and ISTS and TLS RPT. So they both use specific DNS prefix. So just a clarification. So authors are the same.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, you've got a normative dependency on that document. That's just, well,
That's, okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
no, we don't have a normative dependency. I don't want it. But we can fix this by whichever documents published second will have the text. If the registry establishing it published second, then it will have a reference to our RFC, which is already done. If the other way, we'll add the text. Anyway, I think it's entirely
It's
possible.
exactly a chicken race with the DNS op working group.
Actually, I think what happens, there's an INR, when it goes to the INR, INR will check out the documents and it will drop it because they will say that there is no registry created with this name, INR actions cannot be finished, and it will block there. And so that will happen before actually. I think they actually do it at the same time they do some other tests.
I'm sure I can manage this.
All right. The question is, Alexei, in order to manage this, what text do you need?
I will provide the text.
All right. In that case, we're done with this document.
Okay, just one. The other side comment of this was suggestion that the label is, there is a separate registry for top level underscore label or second level underscore label. And most labels are second level underscore labels. So I think Philip suggested we change 2 levels to underscore, SMTP dot underscore report or something like that.
Does that mean we have to specify what the underscore report thing is?
Yes, well, it's just two records instead of one. I can provide the text either way, it doesn't matter.
Right, but it doesn't mean writing a separate RFC to establish an underscore report registry.
No, they are both registered in the same one.
Thank you.
So, I know.
All right.
Do people have a strong preference one way or the other about 2 levels versus 1? I mean, it's potentially slightly operationate. Well, I think the idea is if you create underscore report, you can stuff other things underneath it, which is not just this document, but other things. I think that's why.
I think that was Phil's point, right? Other things will do reporting.
Level 1, that's fine. As is.
I thought there was some reason we changed it because in the original draft, I thought we had 2 levels because we thought it would be harder to abuse domains like Tumblr that let you put random subdomains and pick, and we had sort of two nestings to make it hard, and then we got rid of it and went back the way it is for reasons I don't remember. To be perfect, I think because people have wildcard domain certificates already, and we wanted to let them use it. Actually, was the reason now that I think about it. So there was sort of some rationale behind that.
I think no change is fine.
All right. Well, while Alexei is doing has volunteered to do the chicken race with DNS op and the RFC editor. Excellent. I think that does it for this document. We've got our final presentation for today, the TLS.
Quick questions.
Quiet
When
TLS.
authors can do revision of this?
Yeah, that's a good.
I'm putting you on the
Good point.
spot.
Let's do it quickly because this is past working group loss call. It past everything, right? This is the final revision. It goes out. So you have plenty of time.
One of your co-editors is very active. So Alex is, I think, was quite active. So. Okay.
All right. Let's try to get it done.
Well, talk to them.
All right. All right, required TLS. Jim, you're up.
Okay, so quick show of hands, how many people already know what required TLS does? How many people don't know and need to review? A lot of people are in neither category. Okay. No review then, because not significant show of hands. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so basically what the I've done one update since the last IETF, which basically does what we discussed at the last IETF. We now have two different mechanisms that are part of this same draft. One is an SMTP option, which allows you to require TLS for the transmission of a particular message, and allows you to specify some things about the characteristics of that TLS connection. And then there's now a header field the header field is actually require TLS, but it has one possible value, which is no, which is used to override policy-based requirements like MTA, STS, like DANE, and so forth, basically saying, this is a message that I want to get through regardless of TLS security. Next slide. And this is kind of saying that much of that, the issue with the header field, of course, is that you don't have any way of assuring that downstream hops will implement require TLS no, so it might be ignored, but it's basically a best effort sort of mechanism, as opposed to the require TLS SMTP option, which requires that it be negotiated, requires that the SMTP option be negotiated on each hop, which basically guarantees the or basically asserts a promise from the SMTP server that it will continue to heed the required TLS requirements. Next slide. And I'm just ahead of myself here. So that's basically what I just said. There are three options. One is to require the MX lookup to be DNSSEC protected, which I think is probably the security concern that Chris had started to think about in the context of MTA STS. You do, in order to really be protected against attackers here, you do need to make sure that you're doing a DNSSEC MX lookup because of the direction that this mechanism proceeds. You have the ability to restrict how certificate verification can be done. If you don't like certificate chains because you don't, maybe you're in a country, you're dealing with a country that owns a CA and you're concerned that they're going to manufacture a CA or something like the certificate for the domain that you're sending to or something like that, you have the ability to say, well, I just want this message to go via a DANE verified certificate. So these options are somewhat negotiable. We've had some opinion that maybe this is a little bit too much optioning, and there are other opinions I think around that maybe we should even have more options to specify what kind of ciphers and all those sorts of things. We haven't gone that far. Next slide. And I'm continuing to be ahead of myself here. So next slide. Main issue here is, I've done the update and so forth. Sent out a request for reviews. It was probably during the holidays, so I sent out another request for reviews, and still very little comment. I have gotten indications from some other organizations that they feel like this capability is important, but these are not the sorts of organizations that necessarily participate in commenting on things at IETF. So I would really appreciate if people looked at this and, you know, is this valuable? Is this not valuable? Or are the details right?
All right.
I think that's it.
Why would you turn off TLS? I mean, then now you just have an optional security mechanism again, and we don't like those anymore. Use case. Why do you turn off TLS? Why would you do that?
Well, suppose you had some sort of a you wanted to send a tornado warning. You're the weather service. You want to send tornado warnings to people.
I've just triggered Victor.
And
I get you.
And so the idea is it's important that the message get there. The security, it's completely public information. So really you don't want the message to be inhibited by a policy mechanism.
I'm not finding that particularly compelling.
Victor?
Yes, I don't think the required TLS no case is turning off TLS. It's turning off mandatory authenticated TLS from Dane or STS or similar in recognition of the fact that sometimes there are operational errors. And one thing one needs to do is inform the people on the other end that, you know, they have a problem. So that's a good use case for turning off TLS. Another good use case for turning off TLS is you're a customer of an ISP that, or service provider that implements Dane or STS or both, and you have an urgent message, you know, like tornado warning or the like, to send to somebody, and the destination is broken. They're messed up their policy, but you have an urgent, non-sensitive message. You should be able to say, you know, damn it, send the torpedoes. You know, why can't we let the user decide that delivery is more important than confidentiality or security? It's their choice. With a browser, they can click OK and, you know, and go through all the warnings and go to an insecure site. With email, it's asynchronous in the background. The user can't click through all the hops. This just provides them an equivalent mechanism. It's the click OK, but, you know, done asynchronously in the background. It's perfectly fine.
Okay. That sounds far more convincing than the first example. I actually got up to talk about another thing, which was all of the optional knobs and the idea that you might control policy on subsequent hops with this the option that you were talking about. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense, particularly when you get down to things like controlling cipher suites and all of these things. Yeah, there's an infinite number of knobs you can twiddle, and what you're asking is for someone to override their policy in a myriad ways for the next hop, where you should just be saying, I have an expectation of security that is, you know, please don't send it in clear text and please authenticate the other end. You want to establish the baseline here, and I think that there's reasonable guidance in the existing documents for this. You want TLS and you want to authenticate the other end, right? That's basically what we're looking for. And to some extent, you have to trust that the next hop is going to respect that in the best way that it can. You just handed them a message, and so I think that's probably all you need. A Boolean flag. Turn it on. Make sure it's on or don't deliver it. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do.
How do you feel about the DNSSEC required flag?
I don't see that as particularly meaningful. It's another one of those policy knobs that someone can do.
Right, but without that, you have a threat that somebody who can spoof DNS can you know, send your mail completely someplace else.
Then why don't we just require that always? Yeah, that's the question, right?
Well,
so
because of the reason that we
do
have
you want it to be secure or not is the question.
Sure. And I'm open to whatever the consensus is on this, by the way, but I mean, I'll express the flip side of this is that the sender of the message has some idea of what their threat profile is, and might be concerned about nation state attackers in some cases, or might be concerned about attackers that can spoof DNS. So
I just sent an email that will sort of explain my position on this one.
Okay, all right, that's good.
I'm relaying. So
And before you do that, Victor was first in the queue.
I was relaying Victor.
Oh, you were relaying Victor. So
Go ahead.
Victor, all right, you can
I'll speak to. I completely agree with Martin. I've already in past meetings multiple times expressed the fact that I think all the fine-grained features are a bad idea. This should be a please deliver securely over some kind of TLS that you know to be secure. And any attempt to be much more specific than that is a non-starter. I think all the people who might know how to specify additional properties and have a reasonable expectation that they're doing the right thing are probably in the meeting room, and nobody else will ever be able to correctly specify all the knobs for multiple hops. That's just insane. As for DNSSEC, the only policies that require TLS, presumably is compatible with is either STS or DANE. We don't have any other secure delivery mechanism for start TLS opportunistic, isn't it? And both STS and DANE find various ways of dealing with the insecurity of DNS, each with their own mechanisms. Let the relays at each hop decide. Keep it simple.
Well, the difference here is that if the MX record is changed, you're actually changing the common name that you're going to be comparing a certificate off of. So really, verification of the certificate sort of becomes meaningless at that point.
This is DKG, the mic without being a Jabber scribe. Did you?
hang on, Victor, just
Okay.
1 second.
Both DANE and DNSSEC have mechanisms to avoid forgery of MX records. This is a non-issue.
Okay,
Right, which is why I'm proposing to have an option to require DNSSEC.
No, you don't need DNSSEC. You simply do not need it. DANE, of course, requires DNSSEC, but STS works as well as it works. It's got a first contact issue, but otherwise it works adequately without DNSSEC. But here's me trumpeting STS. I usually say bad things about it, but it's mostly good enough. If DNSSEC isn't available, let's get mostly good enough in the field. If we raise the security bar too high, people turn off security. Read RFC 7435. Opportunistic security is a good idea.
All right, Victor, I got a person on the mic.
This is DKG. I'm going to relay Ned Fried from the Jabber room. He says the history of TLS and SMTP began with Microsoft shipping a product which out of the box failed whenever start TLS was attempted. I'm much more concerned about the ability to control the characteristics of TLS across multiple hops. The essential characteristic of email is that it gets through when nothing else does. Compromising that has to be done carefully. So, to be honest, I'm not entirely clear from that text whether he is in support of the fine-grained flags or opposed to the fine-grained flags. Taking off my Jabber relay hat as DKG, I think, opposed to the fine-grained flags because they seem to require that everyone who implements require TLS have a suite of options available to them. And I think that there's a sort of narrowing of possibilities that your message will actually get through when you do that. And so I think I agree with Victor. I'm going to need to go shortly, and I'm taking notes. We've got 2 minutes left here.
And we've got 1 minute left. So final thoughts on the mic, very quickly.
Brian Gondwana, I was going to come up and say likewise, absolutely, as simple as possible and also as future-proof as possible. The more we tighten down exactly how it's done, the more this standard is going to have to be revised if anything changes in the environment we're in. It's better to say a secure channel that the best practice at the time.
Right. So there seems to be quite strong support in the room for removing as many policy nodes as possible from this draft. But of course you don't, as you say, you don't have like a lot of review. Any of you who have sort of participated in this discussion, we really appreciate this if you could take the time to go and read and review Jim's draft, because this is a working group document and we're going to get it done. With that, we don't even have time for open mic, and we'll see you when we see you, probably in Montreal.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, it was good.
Yeah, absolutely.